Romance. It used to be the greatest escape for some, and for others, it was the greatest and most elaborate puzzle. Just like everything, though, it evolved, and it had to. Because in truth, the artistry of romance was not always represented in the way that a lot of people know and experience romance. For artists, though, it has become a tool or device that you can utilize to add depth, credibility, authenticity, and sometimes just shock and awe. So where are we, and where can we go with this idea of romance? Let's talk about it. Then we'll have CL Cannon along with indie books you might enjoy if you're a fan of The Other Side of the Sky by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. So let's grab a beverage, get ready to talk about the art of romance and its evolution with the great panel that we have assembled for you today on This Week in Indies with your host, Joe Compton. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. It is This Week in Indies. I am your host today, Joe Compton, and we've got a great show ahead for you. We're gonna talk about romance, whether it gets steamy or innocent or beautiful. No matter how you look at it, we're going to tackle it and its evolution. I've been wanting to talk about this topic, and I just happened to come across the perfect dais to bring on to talk about it. I mean, I think we've got every corner of every part of romance covered with these four amazing artists. So I'm real excited to talk about all of that with them. We'll say hello to Anita and Tiffany breaking the fourth wall. Hello, everybody. Hello. So let's start. Let's just jump into the conversation. Before we do that, though, let's introduce ourselves. So, AJ, start us off, please.
I'm AJ Mulligan. I write primarily romance, paranormal romance, contemporary, sci-fi, all the things. I do enjoy mixing it up with pairings and different groupings of characters, and I'm really excited for this show today.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. All right, Tiffany.
I am Tiffany Vega. You can find all my books at booksbytiffanyvega.com. I am a multi-genre writer. I did release my first two fantasy romance, one last year, one this year, and it's a dark fantasy romance.
Nice. All right, Deborah?
Hi, I'm author Deborah Parmley, and currently my website's down, so I'm going to redirect everybody to the Goodreads, where all my books are listed. I write romance in many subgenres, and then as Deborah Bishop, I write non-romance. So if you see Deborah Parmley, it's going to have romance in it in some way.
Nice. All right, Lily?
Hi, I'm Lily Duchesi, USA Today bestselling author and founder of Partners in Crime Book Services. Under this pen name, I write urban fantasy romance and paranormal mysteries, which somehow also wound up containing romance. I also write romance, predominantly contemporary for adults, as Samantha Calcott. And for the first time ever, saying this out loud, I write dark, taboo, and reverse harem romance as S.L. Sinclair.
Nice. All right. I love breaking news here. So, yeah, I kind of just want to get right to it. I'm curious though, your evolution into romance a little bit before we talk about the actual evolution of what is, the landscape of romance. Why did you gravitate towards romance? What was it about it that you wanted to write it?
It just comes so easily sometimes, like at least for me anyway. I started with writing. I wrote a supernatural thriller, which didn't really have romance in it. I wrote a sci-fi dystopian series I'm in the progress of writing that has a lot of romance in it, but it's not technically a romance. And it just evolved. The more I wrote, the more romance was in it. So I just kind of gravitated towards that in my main genre.
it was sort of organic for me. So the first short story I ever had published was in a horror anthology. It was a vampire story, and the editor there told me that it had a lot of romance in it, which it did. Then I went on to write my first novel, and I was making it a Western historical. And as I wrote, it became more and more romance. And so that taught me that no matter what I'm writing, the romance is coming in, because that's just how I write. So at that point I went, oh, romance it is then.
Yeah, I go where the characters tell me to go. My very first series, a paranormal detective series under the Lily Lucchese pen name, was originally a standalone without a happy ending, and the characters told me, "No, we're in love. Give us more books." So that's how that began. And when I started the Samantha Calcott pen name, I started out of spite on two fronts. The first front being I had a couple of people who, because I was very young, under 25 at the time, they didn't think that I could. So I did it. And then I also was very much rebelling against the current popular BDSM romance that was going around as someone actually in the BDSM lifestyle. So I wanted to write a real BDSM romance. And then the characters for other stories just kept coming and coming. So I had to write their stories.
For me, this series that I'm writing currently is the first dad that I've actually done with like true romance. And of course, I had to do it in my flair where there's, it has to be dark. And, I hate happy endings. So why I kind of lean towards the dark romance more than just regular romance.
So, I mean, romance is so layered and nuanced. It is, and it has so much depth to it. If you can really get around it and incorporate it into what you're doing, you can virtually do it in any genre and any style, and call something that that you say that it has a little romance in it. But the technical aspect of what romance really was, do you feel like that doesn't exist anymore? Do you feel like, I mean, because you think of romance still has amongst the general population that stigma of Harlequin romance, just straight up, even to be crass, man woman romance, with the Fabio with the shirt off, and all of the things that you think of when romance first pops into somebody's brain, right? That's, a lot of people gravitate toward that idea of it. But like I said, it's so layered and nuanced. So what do you all feel about? Do you feel like that's passe now? Do you feel like that there's still that segment there, but you're not part of that segment? You've kind of evolved past that segment. How do you feel about that aspect of the romantic area in general?
I think the more traditional romance is kind of almost on the way out, or it's not as predominant as the more out there romance, you might call it. There's a lot more poly LGBTQ. There's a lot more diversity in romance now than there was, 15, 20 years ago, whatever, when Fabio was on all the covers and everything. Now there's a lot more variety you can find in the genre, and I think that's great because there's variety in all of us. Why limit it?
It's reader driven, no matter the time period. When romance changes, it's reader driven. It's kind of like little kids that enjoy a thing, like let's say you're spinning them around the room and they say, more of that, please, more of that. Well, that's what the readers do. They read a story, they want more of that. That's how we end up with formula fiction of any genre, and that's how we end up with tropes that people like, because they're looking for that thing that they had last time. So it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but if it's only that, it limits us, and it limits the reader too. So it's good to see that expanding to allow for both.
But the first thing I want to say is not to knock, of course, our romance forebears, because at the time when women were writing these novels, Harlequin was doing something very taboo. They were writing things very taboo, like, you know, taken by the prince, or, and, you know, that was not something that was allowed in society. So they did set the tone for what those of us who write dark LGBT poly romances, they set the tone for us. But it has clearly evolved. And part of the reason it is, I'm going to go off what Deborah said, people did just want more of that formula. But as us writers became more daring, again, just like our forebears, we discovered that, you know, we are unique people, we are diverse people. And readers are now discovering, and they're coming to us writers and they're saying, hey, I didn't even know I was into this stuff. You know, I found these things I'm now into or practicing in real life. You know, it's allowing people to discover, oh my God, I am poly, I am bi. I do want to try out all of these things that people told me were a sin and were taboo. So I think we're continuing that tradition, and indie publishing especially is allowing us to break those walls down and shatter those ceilings.
I like to think of books as ice cream. And it's good that everybody enjoys ice cream, and we can like different flavors. You don't get mad at somebody because they like butter pecan and they don't like strawberry, or vice versa. And I'd love to see the day when we could all just say, isn't it so cool that we all like ice cream? And everybody can choose whatever flavor they want.
You know, it's interesting too, because I think there is also a misnomer about the idea of selling romance as well, right? Because, you know, right now the in word is romantasy, right? And that and you know, there's a segment, as AJ will tell you, as Lily will tell you, there's a segment of the population that there's a segment of an audience that is a very loyal and ground audience that, you know, you can be successful at, that's not necessarily in the mainstream consciousness, but it is a very, very fruitful segment. Am I wrong in that aspect? I think what I'm trying to say is that, you know, whether the general public acknowledges segments or not, there are segments out there where people can gravitate to writing toward those areas and be successful.
So back to the ice cream example. If you're writing butter pecan versus strawberry, you just need to find the readers that like the butter pecan, and vice versa. And there are all these groups out there. They may not get a lot of attention in the internet, or in the news. It used to be news, now it's internet. But they're out there and they're looking. And in other different things, it's not just the type, but it's the format of the book. I found out from living in this motorhome full time that I go around to these parks and these people that are aging cannot find large print books. So I start putting mine in large print. So it's just a matter of finding the segment of the readers that you want to provide books for, and trying to find them and connect, which is the tricky part right there. Once you find them, you're golden.
That's very true. You do have to just, here's the thing, if we want something individually as a writer, and that's what we're thinking of, obviously there's going to be at least one other person on earth who wants that too. No single person in a world of 7 to 8 billion people is unique. None of us. So when one person wants something, we just have to, like, writing as S.L. Sinclair, I had a couple people accuse me, oh, you went into RH, which not all of my books there are RH, but you went into dark, you know, for the popularity. I'm like, no, I went into that because there was nowhere else for me to put this story that has been ruminating in my head since I was 16 years old. And I thought people would panic and freak out and ban me if I were to ever write something as twisted as what I've been writing there. But those type of stories have always appealed to me. You know, it's fantasy. It's not real. I'm not condoning anything that goes on in these books in real life. But I realized, well, if I want it, someone else has to want it. And that's true. People to varying degrees do want these stories. So as writers, we have to sit there and realize we're the market too, because we're all readers as well.
That's an interesting point, though. I mean, with romance, unlike horror, right? Any horror writer that writes gruesome horror, right, just writes these terrible, terrible things that happen to people, and the mindset of a killer. Nobody accuses them. Well, sometimes they do, because people just like to do this, but nobody accuses them of being a killer, right? Nobody says, oh, this is what you're really thinking of reality, right? But with romance, there is sometimes that segment that goes, you're kind of dirty, and we shouldn't associate with you, and we're going to cancel you, or whatever the case may be, right? And that it's an interesting dichotomy there.
It very
It's
much is.
definitely so.
Oh, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Tiffany. Are you sure?
I was going to say it's very much a double standard with, especially when a woman's writing it compared to a man writing something that is more sexualized or dirty. And people do judge you because then they look at you like not only you're living that lifestyle, it can't be completely make believe. It's you're living that lifestyle, you're doing those things. So we're not going to judge you as you're writing, but we're going to judge you as a person. And it's really hard to get somebody to, especially being a female, look at you differently from what you're writing to who you are, because they just automatically judge you. Oh, you're sleeping with multiple people, or you're doing this because you're writing it.
It's kind
Which
of
not another thing. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with sleeping with multiple people if you are poly. I have plenty of friends who are in open relationships, poly relationships, but it does come with this stigma where, and I think it sometimes comes between people or from people who have repressed themselves for a very long time. It's the same reason that people bash, LGBTQ authors. Nearly every single thing I've written, being an LGBT person myself, every single thing that I've written has included it somehow. And, I remember back when that was starting, people seeing how I present female going, oh, you're just adding MM in there for the shock value because you think it's hot. No, because these people exist and they should see themselves in stories too. A non-binary person, I should see myself in a story. And people don't like that. They push back against it. Many people were taught that, sex is procreation only. Sex is dirty. Your body is dirty. Your wants don't matter. And that is predominantly sent towards females. And so they do go and they attack people like us who are allowing ourselves to feel and to imagine and to put that out there. But I've seen a lot of people who originally were attacking who are now thanking us because slowly we are breaking down those mental barriers that people don't even know that they have and that have been ingrained in society for centuries.
It's a mistake to think that the author who is writing a fictional character is writing about themselves. That is a mistake. My last book had a serial killer. I had to do a lot of research for that just to even try to get into this dude's head. It was really hard. Now, if someone picks that book up and reads it and they say, well, Deborah, you have serial killer tendencies, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. So to take that to anything else that an author's written, we imagine it, we see a character, we hear a character, we're in that world. That doesn't mean we're living that or even thinking that at all. And it can be very difficult if we're not even close to what we're writing. Like, for the example, the serial killer. We're not, if it's not memoir, hello, it's fiction for writing. So these are fictional people.
What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people, especially if you write kind of almost too well for your own good, people think you know more about the tropes and the things than you really. I'm in a monogamous marriage, but people might think that I write so much RH that I'm, I have a poly lifestyle myself. It's like I don't. That's just the way the stories go. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of assuming the author is part of the story themselves when it's not really the case.
Yeah, and Anita says even in horror you have the purity trope, which is ridiculous. And Tiffany added, yes, and the rule: if you have sex, you die first. Yeah, it is interesting, but also I don't know. I think there's. Do you feel like there's a freedom in expressing yourself fictionally? Expressing yourself fictionally. Let me put that very clear out there. Nowadays, as opposed to maybe even 5 years ago, do you feel like there that the audience is finding these things, right? So it's becoming something that you're able to write a lot more, and you know, I think Lily, you said it, that you've wanted to write something in a space for a while, and now you're exploring that space. So is that the sign of the times? Is that the idea of, it just where you are? I mean, what factors into the idea of being able to do that right now?
I think it's absolutely a sign of the times. Yeah.
It's a sign of the
Uh,
times. It's also a sign of what's inside of you, though.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in a person's career. Like, AJ, I've known you almost since we both started, and I've seen you evolve into going into writing RH. So, like, my clients as well, ones who started out writing what they thought was appropriate, are now writing extremely dark RH, dark romances. And I've watched these people grow into confidence. And that confidence comes from writing what we enjoy. It doesn't just come solely from reader demand. It's a form of confidence that romance can give people that a lot of other genres, I think, don't give that confidence or that growth. And I write in other genres. So that's the reason that I'm saying this. I'm not like saying, oh, romance is a bit superior. Romance is a different sort of freedom.
I'm wondering for you, Deborah, did you feel trapped by it? Because you're now branching out into not romance.
Not trapped. So my first book came out in 2008, so I've been at it for a while, and I used to be a member of RWA. Several things have changed since then. The first is the definition of romance. Now, it used to be romance had to have a happy ever after, always had to have that. And they would have that up on their website. If you go to their website today, it says that 2 components must be there. 1, a central love story, and 2, an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. So you can have happy for now. You don't have to have happy ever after. You don't have to have a wedding. You don't have to have the older style, which goes with the times, because if you think back to the very, very oldest romance, marriage was the goal. Man, woman, marriage, that was the goal. That was the thing. There wasn't much else. We've always been able to write whatever we want. The trick has been, do we have the confidence, as you just said? And 2, will anyone buy it? Back then it was, will the publisher buy it? So it's really interesting how RWA has changed. If you go to their site now, because of past issues, which I won't go into, that would take a whole nother hour. They've put a section on their website that's romance trailblazers. And I'm just going to mention a few of these so you get an idea of how there have always been authors out there who are trailblazers, who try to write a thing, and back then it could get a publisher, but boy, that was an uphill climb. So from 1970 to 1989, they've got a grouping. So in 1922 was the first modern romance. That was The Flame and the Flower, Kathleen Wood-Weiss. And after that, in 1974, was the first biracial romance. Then in 1974 also was the first gay romance. In 1975, the first YA. In 1980, the first Own Voices. And in 1984, the first book by a Black author. In 1986, space romance. In 1987, paranormal romance. So, well, this one kind of blows my mind. In the 1990 to 2019 section, I don't like the terminology, but it used to be a descriptive, so okay. Please don't be triggered by this. 2001, the first early historical fat representation. In 2004, the first early contemporary fat representation. So at this point, the bodies of the women in the stories had changed, and that was okay. And again, that's just a description.
I was disturbed by the 1984 first Black author. That's I can't. Yeah. That's unbelievable to me.
And did they have to fight to get that one? Some of these are names that you'd recognize because they have a lot of books out. Did they? It would be interesting to talk to these folks and find out were all the other books they were putting out there, and then they insisted, and the publisher said, okay, well, we'll try it, and they did that one little token one to put it out there, and then that was it. Because in most cases, these things didn't really take off when this trailblazer put that book out there.
Yeah.
But it is a good snapshot of the timeline of things. So I'm going to go back and remind everybody that you can write whatever you want to write. Just write it. Now that we have indie publishing, you can also put it out there. So please don't let that stop you.
I also feel the need to say, as you brought that up, this is quite a white panel. I think I'm probably the one who has the most ethnic background of everybody here. And I also want to say to anyone who is not white, not female representing, romance is very open. I edit a lot of interracial romance, a lot of romance by Asian authors, Black authors, Latina authors. Please don't look at this, look at a thumbnail and see, oh my God, it's still just such a white plane. It is not. It really isn't. So please don't let that silence your voice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. It's kind of hard to segment into what I was going to talk about next, but yeah, it's just, I mean, it's sad that there's such a repression around romance, right? And such a stigma as well. But I don't think that's what's stopping a lot of authors, and a lot of people putting stories out there. I think ultimately a lot of, like, let's just say fantasy and science fiction authors, right, who grew up on the Heimlins and the Herberts and even to a certain extent Stephen King in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of romance represented in that faction, right? And sometimes when you all talked about this, you write what you want to write because it's what you want to see written out there, right? And so oftentimes when you become a fan of something, you kind of mimic that, or you give it homage, right? And so a lot of authors who are in the science fiction and fantasy realm, especially, and to some extent the horror realm as well, have an issue with putting romance within the context of their story. And maybe it's because they struggle with romance just period, or maybe it's because they don't feel like that should be part of it, whatever the case may be. So you all have written in different genres, you all written in different subgenres, and you've incorporated romance just because that's naturally you're gifted at that. So what would you say to somebody who is trying to find a way to do that, or yeah, it's just trying to find a way to put it in there? How do they get started? Because writing's a muscle, writing's an exercise, writing's a discipline. So is there a way for you to incorporate romance into that discipline and get that muscle memory going for it to incorporate it?
What I've done is, because I write in so many different subgenres, I take a page from Ray Bradbury and I will experiment with a short story. So I've had the vampire story, horror. I've had sci-fi. I've had fantasy. And so rather than investing in 100,000 or more page or words, 100,000 word book, you can try the short story and see if it's flowing okay. If you can do it in a shorter piece, then you can do it in a longer piece. And you haven't spent an entire year on something that didn't work out. So it also allows you to play with different muscles. I think of it kind of like Olympic athletes try different things. They don't just do, they don't just do the hurdles or the high jump. They try the different things. And it's working different muscles. So even if it becomes something that you're not going to go in that path, you've tried that muscle, you know how you can do at it. And it's okay to experiment. And everything doesn't have to be published. You can do something for the fun of it, to see if it's working for you, and then decide if you want to put it out there. And that's okay too. In fact, I'd say that's very freeing. It's what I've done.
Yeah, you pretty much described the last 10 years of my writing career.
I think also AF in the comments made a good point that writing romance can be hard. You get a lot of one of my biggest pet peeves in movies and books is when the romance is forced between two characters that have no chemistry. Romance is not necessarily easy. Some people think this is just an easy thing. You throw some people together, have some sex happen, boom, there you go. It's not necessarily though, and I think that's kind of what makes it harder for some people to branch into this genre, is because they don't work on the nuances and the chemistry between the characters, and that's where they falter.
AJ is absolutely right.
Exactly.
I actually recently just posted about this. People who think, oh, I'm going to throw a sex scene in there. I'm just going to go write this romance book and I'm going to make money off of it. It's like, good for you. Please tell me how that works out for you. You just think it's that simple. Because again, it comes back to that stigma of romance just being something silly for women. And it's not. Romance is like any other genre. You have to research. You have to read a lot. You have to be interested. And another thing, I say this literally every time you ask me to tell people how to get into something, I said the same thing. Listen to your characters. You can't force a romance into a story that doesn't want it. And at the same time, if you have a stigma against romance, you can't take the romance out if your characters want it. Writing my very first on-page sex scene, I didn't know it was coming. And I remember I had to rewrite the whole thing. It was bad. I'm going to admit that it was bad. None of us start out at this good. But if you want to dive into romance, read a lot, talk to other writers. There's an amazing, amazing community in whatever subgenre you want to write, wherever you want to get into. Don't think that it's easy, but also don't avoid it just because it is difficult. Because yes, once I've written at least over 15 romances by now. And once you've written after a certain amount, it does get to the point, am I repeating this? Is this, and you have to go back, you have to look at your other work, and you have to be sure you're keeping it fresh for the readers. It's the same in any genre, but when you're writing, again, sex scenes and breakup scenes, and, that third act reunion, which not all books have to have that either, it does get difficult. And that's where you have to keep learning and keep working on yourself and keep working on your craft, especially if you love the genre. That makes it easier. Just, again, don't go into romance if you just think it's going to be easy and fun and make you money. You have to go into it for the love of it, because, again, it's about love, and readers are going to know if you half-ass that romance.
Kind of how the whole RWA controversy started, was somebody deciding to do that.
So as somebody who... Oh, go ahead.
Writing a love scene is just as hard as writing a fight scene.
Yes.
They are both a dance of a type. They both require a certain kind of choreography, the same way that a fight scene is choreographed for a movie. In your book, those are the two big choreographies that you need to get right. And if you don't get those right, the read won't be smooth for your reader. So those are skills to work on if you want to do either of those two things.
So as somebody who writes, the majority of mine is fantasy. And with my first series, The Elements, it does have a little bit of romance, but it's not the main focal point of the story. And I think it was easier for me to step into romance after I had wrote that. So for somebody who's trying to put that into their book, especially if it's sci-fi fantasy and not a traditional like romantic book, first of all, it has to make sense to the plot. You can't just put two characters together just to have a romance in there. It has to make sense to the plot, and it doesn't have to go to like a traditional romance. You don't have to have them falling in love. You don't have to have them breaking up. You don't have to have them getting back together. Because the romance is only secondary plot to this series, so it doesn't have to have all those ups and downs. It could just be two people who appeared on the page together and they have a romantic connection, but it has to make sense to the plot. So you don't have to try to put the love scenes in. You don't have to try to to start out. You know, you don't have to put a sex scene into your romance when you're writing a different fantasy, because if it doesn't make sense to the plot, you're going to lose your readers. So the first step is to maybe in your rough draft, put a little bit of romance sprinkled in there and then grow it from there. Because it is something that you can't just throw in and be like, oh, I'm going to put A and B together and they just met and it's going to be instant love. And, you know, because it's different for when you're writing it into fantasy, into sci-fi, and especially when it's not the main plot.
It can't be
Joe
forced
knows
in.
my Paige Papillon series. The romance doesn't begin until book 4. Book 3. I'm writing book 4. And doing that, I wasn't sure if I wanted there to be a romance between the main character and someone else at all. But they kept pushing me towards that, and I gradually worked towards that. You know, the romance just happens to be there. It's just something for readers to enjoy and to get depth of character. You know, it's
Sure.
not... that's how you put it into another genre, where if you want to just have that there, again, it's listen to your characters. If they don't want it, they're going to tell you.
Exactly. Trying to force the romance in with any 2 characters or more, it's like trying to fix someone up on a blind date and hoping they'll get together. They may not want to be with that person. Your character can do that to you. So you've got to listen to your characters. You can try to put them together and see what happens, but if you force it, it's going to be like a bad blind date, and it won't read smoothly. It'll be forced, and the reader will know it's forced. Pretty much, they can tell, you know, if it's an organic thing, just like we can tell. We see 2 people that are attracted, and you can tell it's just going boom, boom, boom. They're going to eventually be together. You can almost see it play out when it's really strong. If you have people that are trying really hard and it's not working, that's a problem. Now, in romance, there is a subgenre of romance where they can't stand each other and now suddenly they love each other. That one's a tricky one to pull off. Some people can do it. Not everyone can. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's all a matter of, can you make it believable, plausible? Would your next door neighbor be able to do what you just put in your book? Because we're trying to write about real people, not, you know, we're not paper dolls, you know, moving them around. They're not puppets. They're real people. So would the real person that you're writing about do that? Would they be attracted to that person? Would it go well? Are their personalities going to constantly clash? I tend to believe that if they're clashing a lot in the beginning, it's going to take a whole heck of a lot for them to be smoothly meshed in the end. You have a lot of work there. So, but that's just me, in my opinion. You can pull that off. I've seen people do it, but I can't pull that off.
Awesome. Well, I can't pull off what CL Cannon does every week either, because she's so awesome at it, and that is the Indie Connection. So we're going to take a little break, and here's a great Indie Connection for you, and we'll be right back right after that to talk more about romance.
Hey guys, CL Cannon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bringing you another Indie Connection. Today I'd like to tell you about some indie books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of The Other Side of the Sky by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. This was a really hard book to find exact matches for. It is a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi with some forbidden romance in there. And so each of the books that I am going to show you by indies have a few variations of both of those. The first book I have for you is called The Breaking Light by Heather Hansen. In a stratified society where contact with the sun is a luxury reserved for the elite, those kept prisoner in the darkness will do anything to find the light. Arden, beautiful, street-smart, and cynical, is one of the citizens of the lowest level, known as Undercity, of an off-world colony. A blackout ban traps Arden in her district, but as sister to the leader of the most powerful gang in Undercity, she has access to Above. There she meets Dade, one of the few lucky enough to be born into the sun-kissed families who reside in the towers, soaring above the rest of the city. But life isn't perfect in the sky. Dade, desperate to escape his upcoming arranged marriage, has a secret of his own, and he's willing to risk everything for it. An unlikely romance develops between the two teens, but their love faces opposition from above and below. When her gang pressures Arden to help break the grip of the elite and end Dade's interference with their drug trade, she is forced to make a deadly choice between love and family loyalty. But will the brewing class war destroy the world around them first? The second book I have for you is called Evergreen by Krista Mayer. Abram and Cade Devoir will live until the world burns to the ground, it is said. Until Cade burns it to the ground, it is said. Abram rules Renair alongside his brother, who is at the best of times a handful of matches waiting to be struck, and at the worst of times an inferno. When Tessa's parents offer her and her sister to Renair's twin brothers as brides, Tessa will do anything, to save her sister from the hell-spawn Lord of the East. Abram sees in Tessa the fire and spirit his unending life has stripped from him. He also sees an opportunity to make amends for the more than a century he has spent watching Cade inflict pain upon the world. But to end his brother's reign, sacrifices must be made. How else do you stop a man whose fate is tied to the stars? The third book I have for you is called Blessed with a Curse by Katie Cherry. There's no escaping the gods, and I'm on the most wanted list for the worst of them all. Humans using magic is a crime punishable by death, which didn't seem like something I had to worry about, since I live my life in meticulous secrecy. But it turns out no one can hide forever. The night my magic activates on its own to release a gorgeous demigod from the town statue, my deadly fate is sealed. Now Nick Andros and I are on the run, and while Nick thinks my magic is strong and I should fight for my freedom, going up against Zeus himself is a death wish. Too bad once he tracks me down, all that running won't matter anymore. One way or another, Zeus gets what he wants, and the gods want me gone for good. And the last book I have for you is called The Princess and the Pawn by Caitlin Davis. The only thing more forbidden than their magic is their love. On the eve of her courtship trials, Princess Liana Athionis has only one thought on her mind: escape. All her life she's wondered what awaits beyond the confines of her floating kingdom. With only hours of freedom left, she's determined to find out. On the outskirts of the Dove Isle with the rest of the Raven convoy, bastard-born Rafe fights the same urge to run. Not from the illegitimate role he was born to, but from the ruse his brother the prince wants him to play. Two kindred strangers on a crash course. Come morning, nothing will ever be the same. Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on the Indie Connection. Bye.
As always, another great indie connection from CL Cannon. I really appreciate that. I don't know. I think she found 4 books that sounded pretty good to me. So, yeah. But anyway, that was a great indie connection. Thank you, Courtney, for that. And back to the conversation at hand. I am curious where you feel like romance is still missing. Where is there something out there that is not being tackled enough or nuanced enough that you see as an area that romance can improve?
One thing I'm hearing from readers is that there aren't enough stories about characters who are of a certain age. They're all in their 20s or their 30s or even their 40s. You have to keep in mind that the population is aging. So you've got 60 and 70-year-old women out there wanting to read romance and can't relate to the characters because it's, like the age of their grandson or something, which you can understand. That gets a little bit harder, I would think. And there can be beautiful love stories about older people because they've lived so much and they could have overcome more things than a younger person can do. So there's that. I think, okay, so I wasn't going to mention this, but back in July I had a stroke. I'm now a disabled author. I've looked around. There's not a whole lot of stories out there, probably because of own voices, because how do you write a disabled person if you're not disabled? Although I have written one that had a blind heroine, but I did my research and I talked to people who were blind to do that. There's not enough of that out there. And that's not to say I can't jump in a book and just enjoy any kind of story, but I'm noticing that more because I'm now seeing it from a new lens that I didn't have before. I couldn't see it. I wasn't standing in that spot. So I suspect there are other things out there that are like that. And unless we're in that spot to see through that lens and go, oh, there's not enough of this, we aren't going to know unless people tell us. So it's important that readers let us know. So readers who are listening, please let us know, what are you looking for that you can't find? We'll try. I mean, we can try large print. We can try writing older care. Lots of things we can try, but we don't know unless you tell us.
To go on a different personal part of it, one of them I've rectified, one I unfortunately have not yet. But again, I follow the characters. I can't force someone to be with or not. And I would like to see more non-binary romances. Whether someone looks non-binary, we do not have a look, by the way. We look however we want to. I would like to see that, and autistic and neurodivergent in romance. Growing up, I didn't like a lot of romance because as an undiagnosed autistic person, I didn't know and I didn't understand, like, okay, why are you behaving like this? This isn't realizing I was seeing their neurotypical romance through a neurodivergent lens. So the first thing I've done was really with Paige, where I've actually said, yes, she is autistic. But in the Coven series, Harley is also autistic. I had not actually named that because in her situation, there isn't a name for it in that place. But she also approaches it from a neurodivergent angle. And a couple of my other romances, a lot of people have said this doesn't read like, typical. They don't have that miscommunication trope. Being neurodivergent, that's one of the things that always annoyed me was I don't get a lot of subtleties. So I want people to be straight with me. So my characters are straight with each other. So I don't have that. And a lot of readers have come to me and said that they like it. And again, it's not something that I've said, but I write it as an autistic person so more people can actually enjoy the romance without sitting there. If you're not autistic, you don't understand. Your brain kind of itches a little bit when you get this really weird miscommunication vibe with the characters. And I would like to see more autistic representation in romance in general. That's my goal, to bring that forward. Are readers going to like it? I don't know, but so far so good. So I want to bring it forward into my full romance books.
Nice.
I think part of the problem is we need more diversity in the author pool as well as in the character pool. Because like I don't feel comfortable writing non-binary or some other aspects that are more niche characters, because I'm a white woman. I don't know what it's like to be non-binary myself, so I don't know how to write that. So it's hard for me. It's like I want to represent, but I don't want to misrepresent. And I think more authors who are of the who are of different backgrounds should come out. I think that's one great thing about being an indie author, is that you can be whatever background you want to be, and you don't have to be whatever the publisher decides you need to be. So I encourage people to write, write more, get it out there, and let people see who you are through your characters. And maybe that will help increase the diversity of the character pool if you increase diversity of the author pool as well.
What do you think, Tiffany?
I would like to see, and it might be something that I might be interested in doing myself, but like an asexual person romance, because it's not a typical romance, and it falls into the LBG category. But I think that would be a different kind of romance to write.
Awesome.
Kreia Rutan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but she is writing an asexual romance right now. I think she's going to be releasing it soon. I just don't, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but she's been writing that, and I think that would be interesting to read when it comes out.
That's Paige as well. Paige is in the third book in the Paige Papillon series. She admits it. She's like, I'm not interested in sex. And she's like, that's the reason that I don't have anyone right now. And that's, the hero kind of swoops in and says, I don't care what you're like. I love you as you are. And that's another thing that romance shows. It's such inclusion. Love is inclusive. Love is the first thing that you're taught as a child, even way, way back centuries ago. The first things that, a lot of kids are taught starts with God's love, parents' love. Love is the first thing you're taught, and it's so inclusive. And it's just, that's another reason I think a lot of us write romance. It's really beautiful. It really is.
And I just love just that there's just so many different types of romance now. And you can really find one that really appeals to you more so than, just the traditional romance.
And there's such a range because we've got everything from erotic romance to inspirational and everything in between. So there is a form of ice cream out there for you. If you're looking for that flavor, there is. And the example from those trailblazers, you can find, there might not be a lot, but you can find some if you keep looking for your flavor, your preferred flavor. And that's great. The difference is, though, at the end of both the two things. If you were to pull the sex out of an erotic romance, you would destroy the story. You had very little left. It's a lot. If you were to pull the spiritual aspect out of the inspirational doesn't necessarily mean Christian. It can be Hindu. It can be anything of an inspirational, spiritual type of. If you pull that out, you destroy the story. So those two are pretty strong in their categories. In between, you have more wiggle room. You can have a little more or a little less. You can do, however strong you want your ice cream to be. But if you're going to be in either of these two ends, those elements must be strong or they will flop. So that's just a general overview.
The interesting thing about writing, right, and just in general life and time, right, is that when you introduce a new audience to something, right, when a young person picks up Dune for the first time, when a young person picks up or watches romancing. Sorry, I don't know the titles of traditional romances, so I'm just going to go with the movies that I remember, like Romancing the Stone, and things like that. When somebody, unfortunately or fortunately, picks up 50 Shades of Grey, right? When that happens, that person becomes instantly influenced by that, and if they're a creator, they're, like I said before, they're going to pay homage to what got them into being creative, right? And so there's oftentimes when you see things come back into vogue, when you see things come back into fashion, right? I have an inkling that traditional romance, the way that we all knew it when we first started, and when it was the most polarizing and popular thing out there, could have that resurgence or circle back. But to me, it feels like it's one of those things where it was so narrow-minded and so singularly focused on its own rules and an order that it just won't ever come back the same again. Do you guys feel that way, or do you feel like there's somebody who might pick up those older, Harlequin romances from the 70s and 80s and go, you know what? I like this. I want to write this again. Do you feel like that might come back, or do you feel like the evolution of romance has gotten so evolved that it just will never be the same again?
I think that readers that like a certain type of book will always like a certain type of book unless they personally change in their life and find themselves viewing life differently. For instance, the old
Let's
bodice
all hope
rippers,
that happens, because that's the evolution of
like
humans.
the old bodice rippers, some of those scenes you would never see in a book coming out today. But there are readers who still like that, and they're going to use bookstores to find it. And if they're reissuing that book, they'll buy it. So the backlist of your book list is really important for that reason. I don't think we ever lose those core readers that want that particular type of book, but the popularity of a book genre can change dramatically. You see that in trends, and authors can be like schools of fish. When vampires were suddenly the thing, everybody's flocking over here to the vampire, and then I went blank there for a minute, but the next thing, you get my point, you're flocking to the next thing.
Yeah.
By the time you swim over there to write that most popular thing, it's almost time to turn around by the time you get your book done to go to the next popular thing. Now, there's some that stay steady. Romantic suspense is one of those. And I think it's because it's a blend of suspense and romance. And your suspense readers, they just plain love suspense. But the others, they ebb and flow, up and down. Westerns, that's how I started out, Western historical romance. And it was 4% of the market when I started out. And it goes up and down according to the movies. If you see movies suddenly becoming popular in a certain area, the books are going to follow. And the readers are looking for that because they saw it in the movie. Now they want a book like that. And you
I
said
would
that with
imagine.
Harry Potter kind of went the opposite way because Harry Potter flipped that on its ear and it was the books and then the movies. But you see it both ways now. Yeah.
I would imagine Yellowstone has probably something to do with
Yes.
the popularity of Western.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Well, the thing is, any genre can have a resurgence. No genre is ever dead.
Yeah.
Not completely. As long as there's one reader, it can still be influenced by more. But here's the thing that it is now, and I'm probably going to be called ageist for this. I want to sincerely apologize. I do understand that I am going to age, and what I like now is also going to age. But let's say you're a brand new romance reader and you pick up a novel, as you specifically said, Joe, from the 70s, 80s, and you read that now, especially if you are a younger person. You know, if you're someone who grew up with that stuff, yes, you're still going to like it. But if you're someone who was not alive when that stuff was being written and you're picking that up, you can very clearly see a disconnect between that and reality, between that and what you'd really want. That's another reason indie romance and all of these, especially like with our age, where women are able to explore their sexuality. It's not hidden. It's not taboo. That's why romance has progressed so forward. You know, a younger reader, new readers to romance are not going to like those older books. They're very dated in how women and people in general are allowed to love. And that's why that the style may come back, but the tropes won't, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's awesome.
Historical romance is an exception. They're looking for that time
historical
period.
romance, though, isn't written the same way as those are either.
I'm writing a 1920s series, and I very much make it about the women of that time. They're not like
back then women were
to us as women that go throughout all the years are in there, but I can't make them like a modern woman because they're living in the 1920s. And one of the things I loved writing that series is that women made the most gains during those times. They cut up their corsets, they changed, they no more of this, long dresses and all the long hair, and they could drive cars, they could smoke cigarettes, they could fly airplanes. They were breaking so many boundaries back then. It's fun to write it, and writing it from that we can't, and this is how everybody thinks, and then bringing that in, it's a different twist. It's not like
that's what I'm talking about,
contemporary.
Though.
Yeah.
You're writing it in a way that shows women in a good light. The books back then, women didn't even think to write like that. They were set during a time when anything was behind closed doors, it was wrong. You're writing it out there. So It's very different to write historical romance now than it was 40 years ago.
And I just think it's going to grow because in the times that we are now, with especially with women's reproductive rights being
challenged,
and I just think that more
Repressed.
women are going to write further boundary breaking romances, and until we are have autonomy over our own body, we're going to keep pushing those limits with our writing, with the way that we express ourselves. So, and I just think we're going to keep breaking boundaries.
What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I think that, like Lily said, that the tropes of the past probably won't come back. Maybe the style will, but we have come so far. Women have, and a lot of the romances are women centric. It's come so far. I don't know that we'd want to backslide into the past tropes that were there before. So I think she's got a point. We may come back to the same style, but not the same content, if that's...
It makes sense. I was talking to a 20-something the other day about the movie Footloose because they only know the remake of the movie. They didn't know it was a remake, right? And they said they hated the movie because it's the most ridiculous premise they could think of. Who would ban music in this day and age, right? Why couldn't you listen to music when it's so accessible to this person didn't know anything other than the accessibility aspect of it, and the fact that somebody would make a movie about it being oppressed is the most ridiculous notion to them. And it's like, in the 80s though, that movie makes a lot more sense to those who watched it growing up, right? Because those small towns had some of that mentality, and some of them still do, unfortunately, but that was more prevalent, right? And so yeah, you can see how things might not hold up if somebody were to go back to that and try to write that, because they wouldn't understand what that really core essence of that was, right? And so it's very interesting. But that's why I brought that up, because I had that conversation. I just found it funny that they didn't like the movie. I was like, go watch the original and tell me if you like that one, which they're probably going to hate that more. But it's just interesting to me. So because I didn't like the movie because I thought it spin on the original, but that's my personal take on that.
This is what happens when people don't read outside their particular, I like this genre, this is what I want. They get that narrow focus, and they're not watching movies that are in different time periods, or they're not reading books that are in different time periods, and they're in that everything must match today. I think there's a reaction to that kind of thing from a lot of people, and I'm in that category too as a reader. I'm reading more fantasy than I...
Deborah froze. You froze, Deborah. Hopefully you come back. But yeah, I am too. I agree. I am reading more of the things that I would never have read before.
What are you in the mood for?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm reading more fantasy because there's so much reality being kind of forced into the books, and I get a little tired of that. I mean, if I wanted that, I'd turn on the news. So I think there's a little bit of a danger of that too much. Also, there's another danger, which you'll see in children's books, being didactic, trying to teach someone or force a point, or you can tell when the author's doing that, and it's not fun. You can do so much more with a story. You can teach with it being fun. If you try to force that didactic issue in there, I'm going to put the book down. I don't need that. I'm not in school. I don't need that. I want to be enjoying the story. I want to take away from the modern issues we're dealing with on a daily basis. So, I don't want that in my fiction at the end of the day before I go to sleep.
I think it also depends on the talent level of the author. I mean, I put a lot of current issues in all of my books, especially my fantasy. And most fantasy dealt with many current issues. I mean, Lord of the Rings, the biggest fantasy ever out there, is from World War I. And Jesus. And there's religion, there's war in it, and people don't know. It all depends on the skill of the writer.
It's woven in, though. It's not didactic. It's woven
you're good
in.
Enough, you know what you're doing. I mean, every single one of my books, I'm pretty sure the church would burn for all the, gay rights, women's rights, people aren't going to like that. But I write it so well, you don't realize that I'm basically feeding you inclusivity.
There is something to be said for too, that there's an ignorance of what you think you know, and that it's not exactly, everything has nuance, right? Everything has a different take from a different person, right? And so, what one person believes is totally true, and I think this is an issue with our society today, is that when you get on a soapbox, when you believe something so strongly, right, you're not open to being, to listening to other points of view from that same perspective, even, and so I think romance can help in that aspect too, right? It's, writing, reverse harem could be something that opens somebody's mind to something that they were thinking about, but you have to be open-minded, right? And that's the hardest part about getting to a readership is finding that readership that is that. Yeah. Okay.
I would agree. I would agree. And it goes for, I mean, especially I think with romance, but it goes with any genre that, because my books are definitely teetering more to a religious undertone. I mean, I write about ancient gods, and somebody who picked up that was closed-minded about, the existence of other beings would just put it down and be like, I don't want to read this. So and romance is the same way, especially if you have not just the traditional man-female romance. If you have a female-female, man-man, reverse harem, people are going to look at it and be like, well, I don't want to read this. I don't like this. And they may be missing out on the best book ever because they don't have an open mind.
I often see in the romance groups, most of what I edit that's reverse harem and all of what I write includes or the fact everybody in the harem is just all together. It's not just a harem, it is true poly where they are all together. And that's something that I often see a lot of people say, I do not want that. And I'm just like, I respect it. I'm never going to try and change someone's mind, but I'll always make a little comment like, if you're willing to try, because you don't know until you try. That's the thing. And that's the thing that it really is in life as well. And like you said, Joe, romance can introduce so many ideas and things that you would not normally think about or you have been taught is wrong.
And you're just reading. It's not going it's not going to turn you into something that you're not. You know what I mean? It's just reading. And I really, really dislike when somebody's like, well, I can't read that. Well, it's not going to turn you into that. It could be a great written book that just opens up and you can just maybe understand a little bit better where those characters are coming from.
There's a whole big world out there, and people don't discover it.
I mean, if you like pirate romance, okay, let's say you like pirate romance, right? Somebody's really, really into that. In real life, a pirate is likely going to kill you or sell you, okay? One of the two. It's not going to be a pleasant experience, but in pirate romance, it can be this romantic, it's like Johnny Depp type of thing, right? But it's fantasy, and it's okay to have fantasy. So everything doesn't have to match reality. I mean, half the fun of it is just playing with your imagination. And
we lost her again.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever it
that's
is.
What I'm doing is my next book. It's called Acts of Contrition. It comes out in June. It's part of its set, and the set is just called Depraved. It's myself and Rain Matthews. We each had these stories we wanted to write that were, in the very simple phrase, fucked up romances. They may or may not have happy endings, just warning people now. Both of us write differently. But that's what we wanted to do. And that's one of the things that I know people, it may get banned. Like, the heroine in mine is going to suffer from severe abuse at Stockholm Syndrome, falling in love with a captor, along with religious abuse. And that is not something I'm interested in real life, at all. I don't want to be kidnapped. I don't want to be pimped out. I want to eat that sort of thing. But it's fantasy. It's all just something to think about. These are people who obviously never did any role playing as kids. I think people who don't like this stuff. You didn't role play as kids enough.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, right? We all remember going outside and playing till the sun went down, right? And people don't do that anymore.
Most readers, though, are you guys' age and my age. Yeah. I think I was the last generation that went outside and played.
Yeah.
They're the same people who are just very steadfastly against everything that we do.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like
not necessarily. Keep in mind that our parents' generation, I'm 61. I'm not closed-minded. My parents' generation were the hippies. They were not closed-minded.
Yeah.
There's a range within any age demographic, and then we're not all the same within that.
Who won't read this stuff either, but I'm saying, like, I think these people they were raised in an environment that was too closed-minded, especially for a time when people were discovering themselves during those periods. I think these people just didn't get that chance.
I think
Read
whatever
the
we're
books. It'll help you.
whatever we're categorizing or writing or looking at reader demographic groups or whatever, I think it's always that slippery slope danger of then all people are this.
Yeah.
That is not the best of thought
Yeah, no, that's not where I was
writing
going with that
anything.
at all.
So if we can keep in mind that within that group of people that like the butter pecan, there's going to be people that also do like strawberry, or maybe this one likes chocolate, or maybe like a sundae of all three, and that's okay too. There's going to be, I mean, we're not cookie cutter people any more than our characters in our books are. And there's ranges within the categories. So, and the more you talk to readers and the more experience you have talking to readers, the more you learn this. I had to learn this. It's taken me a while. I thought, this group of readers, this. Not necessarily. It's kind of like saying all Southerners like grits. No. There's going to be ranges within that. So that's important to keep in mind, I think.
As someone who edits mafia romance, yeah, that's like saying all us Sicilians are in the mob and we're going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that totally true?
Yeah.
Not
Not all
totally
of us.
true.
Awesome.
I think there's one thing we all agree on, though. We love a good story that takes us away.
Yeah.
And if we can do
absolutely.
that for our reader, we're golden. That's the golden ticket right there.
Yeah, and whether it includes romance or not, that's a whole different idea. But for the purpose of this conversation, if you're struggling with writing romance, it's okay. Write what you want to write, and don't worry about it. But if you were thinking about romance, or you wanted to figure out how to incorporate romance, I don't know that there was a better conversation out there. There might be. I mean, I'm just going to toot my own horn and say there wasn't, and that this was a great conversation to have, and I really appreciate you all being a part of it. Let's go around the room and tell everybody where they can find these wonderful books of yours. So, Lily, why don't you start us off?
I have my link tree right here, and there you can go to my website, my social media. And despite the fact that I write as Samantha Calcott and S.L. Sinclair, I do send updates on my social media about all three pen names via Lily Lucchesi, so that's probably the easiest way. And I'm going to throw a little shameless self-promo and say I also run Partners in Crime Book Services, and I do editing, cover design, formatting, and marketing assistance, amongst some other things for authors. So I do offer consultations as well. So if anyone who wants to write romance is worried, I would like to just put myself out there as someone who will help you from start to finish and will not judge.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, Deborah.
All right. Again, go to my Goodreads because my typical website is down. You can find me on all the other socials until it comes up. I'm most known for writing romantic suspense and military romance. However, I write in many genres, and I have a brand new book coming out this month. It's scheduled for the 30th, but I'm going to bump it up sooner. It's my first urban fantasy romance. So I am branching out a little bit, and you'll see a lot more of that. I also do a Wednesday Words with Deborah on my YouTube channel, so you can find that on here too. Under the Joe posts the links.
Awesome. All right, Tiffany.
All right. Excuse me. I'm Tiffany Vega. You can find all my books at Books by Tiffany Vega. Yord's Curse is the fantasy romance series that I've been talking about on here. The second book actually got delayed. It was supposed to be out in March, but it is coming out the end of this month as well. And the third book will be out in October of this month. So it will be a quick read, and you will have all three of them this year. And just check out Books by Tiffany Vega.
Nice. Thank you for being here. AJ?
You can find all my stuff at ajmullican.com, which I will be updating soon. I've been kind of lax on that. And you can find me on Amazon, AJ Mullican. Most of the socials, AJ Mullican, ajmullican.com/author can get you all the links to me. And there you go.
Awesome. Thank you for being here as well. And thank you all for being here. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for engaging with us. And if you are here after the fact, or right now you just walked in, please hit that like button for us and subscribe and comment. The comments are always available for you to comment after the fact. And if you have a specific question for a specific author here, please just note that, and I will make sure that they see it, and hopefully they'll answer you. And if not, I'll get an answer for you. But otherwise, just check out everything we're doing. We've got a full slate going. I tried very, very hard to stay on deadline and point, and I failed miserably. But I promise you tonight that episode 3 of Zero Means You're Dead will be posted this evening. I'm on the finishing touches. I was so close to finishing it, and then I had to do other things that just life gets in the way sometimes. So, but it'll be posted tonight. So if you want to check that out, and then tomorrow we have live shows as well. We have our spotlight on the multiverse. I'm going to be joined by Mark L. Abbott and Misty Massey. If you don't know, Mark hosts this thing that happens at Multiverse every year called the Monster Mash. It is a fun, hilarious romp of a time that we'll be definitely talking about tomorrow. So everybody come and join us for that. And then right after that, we have First Time for Everything, Juliet Rose's show. And she'll be talking to the awesome Vanessa Junta. And then later this week, I'll be posting a spotlight episode for the documentary about women doing taiko drumming called Finding Her Beat. So you want to check that out as well. It's an awesome, awesome documentary with just an incredible message and incredible talented humans that it's just an amazing, amazing thing. And I was very privileged to talk to all of them about that, as I am very privileged and very humbled and honored to be here each and every week with you all. And we will be back next Sunday with another This Week in Indies. It'll actually be hosted by SM Hillman next week, but that shouldn't deter you from coming and joining us. If anything, that should excite you, because that's always an interesting and different conversation. And we love having those here because, it's always time to go indie now. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.